For decades, working class people have had no representation in the Palace of Westminster. All of the politicians, almost without exception, have stood in the interests of the 1% and the super rich. Jeremy Corbyn's election almost a year ago now changed that. And from the start, it's been clear that the 1% will not accept it, that they are determined to get rid of him as soon as the opportunity arises. And hence, as the Socialist Party predicted, the minute the Euro referendum was over, they've gone to try and force Jeremy out of office. Let's be clear, they're not doing that because Jeremy Corbyn is unelectable, as the Blairites claim. They're doing it for exactly the opposite reason. They moved when they did because they thought there might be a general election. And they are terrified of the idea of a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party coming to power. And the reason for that is simple. It's because millions of working class people who've suffered decades of low pay, of privatisation, of cuts to public services, would have their hopes raised by a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government coming to power. And that in turn would threaten the profits of the capitalists, the 1%, and even threaten their system. So that's why the Blairites are moving against Jeremy. And it's enormously to his credit that he has stood firm and has not stood down as they have demanded of him. But it is even more to the credit of the hundreds of thousands of workers and young people have come to the defence of Jeremy Corbyn. Despite all of the attempts to fix the election, to curtail the electorate, people are coming out to try and get Jeremy re-elected. And obviously, that is the focus rightly in the coming weeks. But we need to go beyond that as well. The Socialist Party is calling for a conference of all of those forces in the Labour movement that support Jeremy Corbyn. Those inside the Labour Party and outside. The affiliated trade unions, but also the unaffiliated unions, like the Transport Workers Union, the RMT, that have just given £25,000 to help Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. Young Labour Party members, but also organisations like the Socialist Party and the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, who support Jeremy's anti-austerity stance. So we should call such a conference to build the anti-austerity movement. And Jeremy's election campaign needs to have as a starting point the platform that he stood on last time. £10 an hour minimum wage, renationalisation of the energy companies and the railways, free education, mass council house building. We would go further with a socialist programme, but even that programme would be enormously attractive to millions of working class people around the country. Now it's clear, Jeremy being re-elected will be a beginning and not an end. The Blairites are not just going to accept his election as Labour leader. On the contrary, they're talking about splitting. Owen Smith has openly said that if Jeremy wins, a split is on the cards, and that is why people should vote for him. This is no different to what the right did in 1981 when the SDP split away. This is at the behest of big business to try and prevent a left-led Labour government coming to power. But let them go. Let's be clear about this. 20, 30, 40, 50 Labour MPs who were actually opposed to austerity, who voted against war, who voted against nuclear weapons, who voted for council house building. That would be 1,000 times more effective than 232 Labour MPs, the majority of whom accept privatisation, accept austerity, think that working class people have no choice but to be low paid. So let them go. And even if they don't, even if they stay and say, we're going to have another bash at overthrowing Jeremy Corbyn, we should not accept that. Labour parties up and down the country should pass votes of no confidence, should deselect Labour MPs. But also nationally, Jeremy Corbyn and the leadership of the Labour Party should say we're going to re-register the Labour MPs. And if they're prepared to accept a democratically elected left leader, if they're prepared to promise to vote against austerity, yes, they can stay. But otherwise, we don't want them to be part of our party. Internationally, we are seeing, with the Bernie Sanders movement, the French strike movement, we're seeing working class people getting off their knees, saying they won't accept more austerity and beginning to look for a socialist alternative. That's what Jeremy's election has represented here in Britain, and we need to build on that, because if we do, we could create a mass working class, anti-austerity party that stood on a socialist programme which would be an enormous step forward for working class people in Britain, and such a party would be very electorally popular. If you agree with what's been said today, if you think that we need to stand firm and have no compromise with the Blairites, the representatives of big business in the Labour Party, then join with us and join the Socialist Party in the struggle for a socialist society.